Hello and welcome to another episode of Geared Toward Gear. My name's Sean and I am so glad you're here as always. Today is the follow-up to the Leatherman Free P2 video that I did a while back. So I've been carrying this and going out of my way to put it to use as much as possible every single day for about a week now. And I will tell you that my opinions on this have not really changed, and it's definitely going back to Leatherman. I'm definitely going to return this. It's not even close to worth $120 in my opinion. And I'm going to explain why and kind of tell you how I used it and what issues actually came to fruition once I put it to hard use. Of course, my first video was a tabletop unboxing, first impressions, and you can certainly identify potential issues, but until you really start using it, you don't know for sure. So let's get the sheath and the little thing out of the way here and talk about the tool. So I've come to the conclusion that magnets just aren't a good idea on multi-tools, in my opinion. I just think there's too much opportunity for it to collect foreign materials, which this one did a little bit actually, and I'll show you that here in a little bit. But let me talk about a couple of the main kind of sharp edges and gripes that I had when I did my initial impressions. And one of them was these little kind of hook shapes here that are quite sharp. If you were to snag your finger or something on that, or your pants, could potentially rip it. And after further inspection and use, I figured out the reason those are there. And so when we deploy the pliers, those hooks there interface with these little tabs on the base of the plier, and that's what locks it in place. So that's just simply the design and the architecture of the tool. And so those openings to accept those tabs, which create those little hooks, are necessary for it to function properly. So there's nothing you can do about that. It's just going to be there no matter what. And that kind of sucks because they're a little sharp. So it is what it is, but it's necessary for the design. In addition, one of the things that I mentioned was this little tab here that sticks up and protrudes and sits proud of the handle there. I found that to be the most uncomfortable thing of all the things that I mentioned. It was the most uncomfortable thing in actual use. And I also learned what those are for. Again, kind of the initial unboxing, I didn't really think too much about it, but that tab interfaces with the tab on the opposite side so that when you close it, let me see if I can get in close enough here. When you close it, those two tabs are going to interface with one another, and the idea is that it prevents it from moving laterally in this direction. So if you can hear that sound, that's those two tabs kind of preventing it from moving in that lateral direction. Now, I will say, speaking of lateral movement, when the tool is deployed, there's quite a bit of play in the handles, and it's kind of hard to maybe see because you're seeing my hands move also. But there's just quite a bit of play here, which just, I don't like. It feels cheap for 120 bucks. Not a fan of that. We'll call it blade play. It's really more plier play, I guess, but I don't like that. So let's talk about some of the tools and kind of how I use them and what my experiences were. So let's start with this side. So the file, it works as a file. I think there's still some wood on there. I used it to file some wood, and it functioned. The cross-cut side here as well as the single-cut side there, it functioned just fine, but it's small, right? So I think, unless you're talking about a nail file, I think you want something a little more full-size, and the P4, I believe, does have a full-size file, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe not. I think it's a full-size saw. Yeah, it is. It's a full-size saw. So you don't get a full-size file on any of the free series. So if you need files or you use your file often on your multi-tool, I don't think this one's great. It's basically the same one that comes on the Leatherman the Wingman. So, and I found that to be true with a lot of the tools. It's as if they kind of robbed the parts bin at the factory from the Wingman or the Sidekick. So the file worked fine, but just its size, is what it is. What else? So the screwdriver worked just fine. I turned several screws with it. No problems there. I opened one can. It was a large can. I think they call them a number 10 can of corn with this. Worked just fine. It takes forever. I don't know why you do that unless you're actually out camping or something and that's all you have, but it works as a can opener. And then there's the awl. And so I talked about this in my first video, and it's not a good awl. And the reason for that, as I mentioned, is that it's also a screwdriver, and it just doesn't work. I tried to pierce a hole in a leather belt, and it worked eventually, but it took a while, and it just looked terrible. The reamer aspect of it here, I took it and I dug it into a piece of oak, some oak wood that I have on my wood pile outside, and I reamed a hole in the oak all the way down to the base of this awl. And in the reaming function, it actually worked quite well. You can see the kind of bezel there where it's kind of sharp, a little bit of wood still on there. But it actually worked quite well as a reamer, and you would have to turn it in the counterclockwise direction to get that kind of reaming action with the bezel or the blade edge, I guess you could call it. So as a reamer, it works quite well. As a screwdriver, it works quite well. As an awl, not so much. And I think that's it for the tools on that side. On this side, we've got the main blade, and I cut through several branches. Again, oak wood, which is not super hard, at least the type of oak that I have here. And the serrations work nicely for that. There's bits of oak all over this thing. It worked just fine. The serrations were actually quite nice. It functioned just fine. It wasn't terribly uncomfortable in this closed position using the larger implements. So no major complaints with the blade. Still wish it was plain edge, but it is what it is. Scissors, no complaints at all. They work just fine. And I do like the size. They're not quite as big as the scissors you'd find on like a Surge, but they're definitely larger than what you'll find on some other Leatherman tools. So I do like the scissors, and the one-handed access to those tools works just fine. But the biggest issue is the pliers. So when you bear down on this thing, I mean, if you look at kind of the open construction that you've got here, there's just kind of these edges everywhere. They're just not comfortable whatsoever. Same thing with the lock piece down here, these little nubs we talked about earlier. So when you bear down on this, and I bear down and put this freaking thing to work, I took my son's bike completely apart and put it back together twice. And then I just wrenched on things, and you know, I beat the hell out of these pliers, to be honest with you. And when you really bear down, like, it is not comfortable. It's actually quite painful. And it's not, I mean, these little nubs definitely don't help, but really it's more just the handle. It's just not comfortable. If you compare that to like if you've got a Wave or even a Wingman or something like that, where you have the tools on the inside, this is the most uncomfortable of any Leatherman tool that I've ever used in terms of the pliers themselves. It is just hot spot galore. So if you're any type of tradesman who actually works for a living, you would never want to use this tool. You would probably use a Wave, a Surge, a Super Tool, a Victorinox. You know, this is not a working man's tool, in my opinion. If you just want to mess around and have something that you can flip for 120 bucks, then, you know, party on, I guess. But for me, not so much. It is very uncomfortable to really bear down on. The other problem I had, and if you go back and watch my first video, a few minutes in, I talked about the action of the pliers, and, you know, I wish they were spring-loaded, and they're not. And the pivot was super smooth, right? So these things were just kind of like butter. Now, after about a week of hard use, if I open these all the way and I tap pretty hard on the handle, it takes a while for them to close. They stiffened up a lot. I mean, a lot. I haven't done anything to address that. I could simply put a couple drops of penetrating oil in there, work it in, and I'm sure it would smooth up. But to open these pliers takes a bit of force, Closing them is the same, but getting them back open is a total pain in the ass because they've totally stiffened up. You can see probably some gunk in there, maybe if I can get it to focus, just from some of the use. And then I had it in my garage for a day on my workbench, and there's some, it's going to be hard to see because it's hitting a shadow. Kind of right in this area, there's some metal debris from my wire wheel that's kind of stuck in there. And I think it may just be stuck to the factory oil. I don't think it's stuck to a magnet itself. But my opinions on this after using it pretty heavily for a week are that it's probably the worst way to spend $120 on a multi-tool. I think they failed with this design. I think the idea is more of a novelty at this point. The flipping action, you know, the tools still pop out like they did before when I opened the pliers. It's just the execution's not good. It's really not good. And for the same price, you could get a Wave Plus, you could get a Surge, you know, you could get bit kits, Victorinox tools, Gerber center drives. I mean, there's all kinds of other multi-tools that I think are far superior in functionality and quality to this. I think this is a failed attempt at being clever, and it is very clever. The engineering is good in that, you know, it took some thought and definitely some engineering to make this function the way it does, but it just doesn't function as a tool, in my opinion, the way it needs to. So I'm going to be returning this to Leatherman. I don't know if I'm going to replace it with another Leatherman or maybe just get the refund and use it for something else. But I am convinced at this point that this multi-tool is not worth $100. It's probably not worth $80. It's actually a lot cheaper feeling than you would think. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the tools, you know, if you do have a Wingman or a Sidekick, a lot of the tools are just the same, like as if they just kind of took the tools straight out of those other existing designs. So not loving it, guys. And I would highly caution you if you're planning on buying one of these. What I would suggest that you do if you're interested is find somebody that has one, or find a local retailer that will actually has like a floor model that you can actually put your hands on and feel it for yourself before you make a decision to purchase one, because if you do, I think you're wasting $120 for sure. There's multi-tools that cost half this price that are twice as good. And now that these pliers are so stiff, closing it one-handed is kind of a bitch, to be honest with you, because the pliers are so stiff. So not a good tool, in my opinion. That's my mileage. You know, I've seen several videos at this point on this tool. I've had a number of comments on my first video. A lot of people saying this is the biggest waste of money ever. Why would anybody even think this is a good tool? Other people telling me, hey, I've had my P2 or my P4 for 2 weeks now and I love it. It's the best multi-tool I've ever owned. So it's like opposite ends of the spectrum. I've not heard from anybody that says, yeah, it's okay, it's fine, I like it. I don't love it, but it's good. It's either I love this thing or it's a complete waste. And to me, it's complete waste. So that's my kind of follow-up, I guess, after a week of putting this thing to use. It's going to be repackaged and sent back to Leatherman, and I'll be getting my $120 back that I can use on something that will be a little more functional. And so let me know in the comments, if you were me and you got a $120 refund for this tool, what would you buy? What would you recommend that I buy? Should it be a different Leatherman? The other Leatherman that I currently have that's kind of full size is the Wingman. So do you think I should buy a Surge, a Wave, or not a multi-tool, a folding knife, or something else you'd like to see on the channel? Let me know in the comments what you think I should use the $120 for, because this is sure as hell going back to Leatherman. I think it was an epic fail, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it, as always, and I'll talk to you soon.